Unit 2, Variables. You survived Unit 1, or at least I'm assuming you did if you're watching this video. And if you're not watching this video, you didn't survive Unit 1, and obviously you're not listening to me right now, so that's okay. We're just gonna move on. Variables. What's a variable? Well, let's say I was making a program, and let's gamify it. Let's say you were making a game, and you wanted to keep track of the player's health. 100's always a good number. Player's got 100 health. You, up until this point, you would have punched this number 100 into your program, and that would have been the end of it. So there's nothing we can't do in programming in this unit. We don't need variables. You never need a variable. But my goodness, after this unit's done, you are probably never going to program again without creating some type of variable in your program, and multiple variables. Because what do variables do? Well, in my opinion, there's two main reasons we use variables. The number one reason is it helps us organize our code. Because as I said, if you're making a program with a player health of 100, you would just have this 100 floating in space somewhere in your program with no meaning attached to it. In your code, you just have 100. And it would be very hard to keep track of, let's say, 20 players' healths and 20 players' items and all this crap that goes into programming if you aren't organized and you can't decipher what these numbers mean. So variables help us keep us organized. But maybe the bigger reason we use variables is we've got all of these values, and if these values are in variables, it allows us to update them. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you have a player with 100 health, is that player going to stay at 100 health throughout the whole game? I mean, maybe if it's me ripping some COD, but let's be honest here. Programs are always changing. They're changing things behind the scenes. We have to change things to make our programs actually interactable and actually fun to play. So using variables allows us to easily update, change things that we need in order to make our programs function like normal, fun, useful programs. Okay, so how does a variable work? Well, in real life, you could imagine a variable like a box. This is a variable. I have just created a variable. And this variable, I'm going to give this variable a name. You have to give all your variables a name. Otherwise, this whole point's useless. So I'm going to say that this variable is called player health. Notice my variable convention naming. Every variable starts with a lowercase, sorry. And if you have to be more specific with your variable name, in other words, you have a long variable name with multiple words, we use camel case. So the first word of your variable is always lowercase. However, if you're putting multiple words in one variable name, you don't use spaces, you just use capital letters to basically say, okay, this is the first word, this is the second word. So lowercase, uppercase, and any other words you want to attach to it, put them uppercase. That's a little confusing for now. That's not the point of this video. The point of this video is, what is a variable? So I've created this box. I've created this variable called player health. Now my box is empty right now. Can you have empty variables in programming? Of course you can. But they're not very useful. And if they are empty, they will probably have a value very soon in your program. So player health, I'm creating a video game and I want the health of my player to be 100. So I'm going to put this value inside my box, 100. So what have I just done there? Well, now I've got a variable that is clearly for the health of the player, whoever's playing the game. And inside this variable is holding a value, and it's holding a number value. It's holding the number 100. So what's the purpose of that? Well, my programs that I like to code are pretty complex and they're pretty useful. Throughout the game, my player's health is not going to stay at 100. He or she might take damage, they might get armor, they might have potions, yada yada. The player health is always fluctuating. It's always changing. And so instead of just having this 100 just floating in space in my program that I have to keep track of myself, all I have to keep track of is the name of my variable, which is player health. So for example, let's say they take some damage and their health is now 90. I can change my variable to be 90. Let's say they take some more damage and now their health is 75. I can change my variable to 75. Let's say they do all types of things, yada, yada, yada. They drink a potion, all of a sudden their health's up to 120. They got some more armor, their health is up to 150, blah, 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 blah. All this stuff happens. And right now their health is 95. A lot happened to this number. I don't need to know any of this. I don't need to know any of these numbers. All I need to know is the name of my variable. Because if I'm writing code, if I'm writing methods and I'm writing stuff to make my game or my program interactive and engaging, all I need to know is the health of the player. So I'm writing some code and I'm obviously out of paper. One sec. So this is a perfect visual representation. I've thrown that away. I don't know any of those numbers, any of those values. Let's say I'm writing some code to see if the player is dead, as grim as that sounds. How do I know what the player's health is? Well, I can't remember all the things that happened to it. I know he got damaged. I know he took some potions. But as long as I have that variable, hey, I just use that variable. So in my code, I type in player health, and whatever value is stored in that variable, this is going to pop that value up for me. So if I put this in my code, it's going to tell me, oh, the health is 95. So I don't need to know any history with these values. I don't need to know where they started. I don't need to know where their health ended. I have a variable that keeps track of all that information for me. And that's really the purpose of a variable. And this is the real world kind of example. Obviously, we're not coding yet. But as long as I have a variable, it keeps track of everything for me. It's going to keep track of that value for me, because you're going to notice when you start to write some pretty heavy programs with a lot of coding, you don't want to just search through that code and see what number it is. It's too hard. It's too difficult. But thankfully, I have a variable. And as long as I punch player health variable into my program, whenever I need that player health, I just use the name of the variable. I, as a programmer, don't even need to know what that number is. I've got a box, I've got a variable, and this variable, as soon as I punch this into my code, it's going to tell me the health is 95 or whatever it may be at that point in time. Does it make sense? Doesn't have to. We'll start coding. We'll make sense of it. And just one last piece of information. There's all types of variables. So for example, player health, I used a number. So if you want to make a variable that's a number and you want to add or you want to subtract, you want to do all types of math to it, you create an integer. So for right now, all you need to know, if you want to use a number variable, you're creating an integer. And we'll see how this works in the actual program. Another type of variable you might want to make is you might want to make words. So for example, player name. That's a common one. player name equals whatever your character name is. I don't know, Bob. Don't need that, period. So I've got numbers that I can create. So for example, this is a number variable made by the keyword int, which is short for integers. So this is the variable type. This is the variable name. And this is the variable value. I might want to make variables for words. And how do I do that? Well, you use the string keyword, which you guys have seen before. I gotta stop making periods. I don't know what that's all about, but whatever. So if you want to make a variable for a name or letters, you use the type string. You give your variable a name. So this is the name of your variable. And this is the value of the variable. Notice when you're using letters, you have to use the quotation marks. And if you're creating number variables, you have to use numbers, but you don't need the quotation marks. So this line of code has given me two variables. I've got one variable here for player health. And I've got another variable named player name. This variable is holding a value of 95. This variable is holding a value of Bob. Letters, just like that. So now in my program, if I ever want to reference and use these two values, such as the player name or the player health, I don't even need to know what the value is. I can just use the names of the variables and code like that. Once again, maybe hard to understand because we're not programming yet, but we're going to get right into it.